Hello, everyone. I am Geisha Gonzalez, Senior Director for Programs and Strategy at the Center for European Policy Analysis, or CEPA. Thank you so much for joining us for this special conversation on digital innovation as we continue to spotlight the innovators and thought leaders in tech from across Europe and the United States on day 3 of CEPA Forum. I'm honored to be joined by one of this generation's innovators and the youngest founder of a billion-euro company, Markus Villig, CEO and co-founder of Bolt. Bolt is a global company that has gone well beyond its talent start and as a super app with 75 million customers in 45 countries and a mission to make urban mobility more affordable, safe, and sustainable. Welcome, Markus, and thank you so much for joining us.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Fantastic. So, Markus, you started this company when you were 19 years old. And one of the things that I read that really stood out to me, partly because I appreciate the hustle, is that you yourself would go around recruiting drivers when you were just starting the app. What moved you to create Bolt at that time, at a time where it was quite risky?
Well, back then I was 19. I didn't know much about the world, but what I did know was that I was really passionate about technology. Coming from Estonia, I had seen how Skype had revolutionized the world of communication, and a big part of that team was based in Tallinn. My older brother Martin was one of the early employees there as well. So that really generated a huge level of ambition for me as well. That I realized that even coming from a small country like Estonia, you can make a difference in the world of tech.
So is there something that you identify in your early career or development, whether it was, mentorship? You mentioned that you work with your brother on this, or, is there a specific program, something that you can pinpoint, which has led to the success that you enjoy today?
I wouldn't say there was any one single thing, but it was probably a combination of many factors. One was that we had a really great education system already in Estonia for the last decades. One of which was that I was learning programming already in school as well. So I got the basic web development skills from those days. Second was that the country has always been very entrepreneurial. So as soon as we could and the Soviet era ended, people really got into entrepreneurship, and that's always been the culture that I've enjoyed. And my brother definitely has been a big inspiration for me on that front as well. And then lastly, probably it was just that the whole startup scene in Estonia has been exploding the last 10 years. We already have more than 7 unicorns in Estonia, and for a country of 1.3 million people, that's really extraordinary. So it's a combination of all of those.
That's what you just mentioned, 7 unicorn companies from Estonia alone. Just thinking through, I don't think that there is another European country where you could really pinpoint and see so much innovation coming out of today, really, that is having that kind of impact.
So when you look, this is nothing even close.
Not even close, right? Which is amazing. But is there anything as that you would think that other countries could replicate? You just mentioned the education system is very robust and it drives innovation. Is this something that you think could be replicated elsewhere in Europe?
Absolutely. We've always had a very strong focus on the internet space over the last couple of decades. So that's definitely something that other countries can do as well. And secondly, the governmental services have always been digital. So it really already set a very high bar. In 2004, Estonia already got electronic voting, for example. So people have always been very used to adopting these kind of new digital services very quickly. And that, of course, translates over to the business side, which is that most people don't, for example, want to call old school taxi companies if they could use an app instead. So really, that was something that paved the way for us as well.
Which is fantastic. I think it's a mix of innovation, but also the convenience that comes with just having everything at your fingerprints. So really adapting to the customers versus, creating it in the middle, like in an empty space. I'm curious to hear a little bit more. We talk about this lag of innovation. I think a lot of the conversation in Brussels, has been focused on creating the space for European innovation through tougher regulation of big tech firms. One in particular is, of course, the Digital Markets Act. There's also the Digital Services Act. Do you think that this is an effective effort by the EU? To promote innovation in Europe or European innovation? And have you or your peers have you been engaged by Brussels at all as they're contemplating this kind of policy?
I'd say that in regulation, you need to be very surgical, very detailed. What are you trying to achieve? And talking about tech regulation broadly is usually not very helpful. I think it makes more sense to zoom into really the details of what are we talking about here, because tech nowadays touches upon almost every industry. So similar, I think, to how, for example, like oil companies or telecoms or financial sector has been regulated, you need to really go into the details. So specifically, I think that it does make sense in some cases to restrict the power that some of these huge dominant platforms have and to enable more competition, because in some cases it just is blocking new small European startups from actually competing. For example, if some suppliers are locked in exclusivity wise and they cannot work with new players, I mean, that's of course restricting competition. But you really need to be very surgical and mindful. What are you trying to achieve, and not just try to like blanket block all of these big companies from existing. I mean, they do provide a lot of value to the ecosystem as well, of course.
And, of course, one of the things that we hear a lot from Brussels, but also in Washington, D.C., is that companies are often absent from the debate, right? So, I think, they don't come to the table in the same way that, civil society or other government players come to the table. Obviously, by participating in this conversation, you are engaging. But could you share with us what brings leaders like you to the table to have these kind of conversations? What should Brussels and to an extent Washington, D.C. be doing to engage?
Well, high level, I see broadly that most European companies already start off from a bit different mentality, and we are generally quite used to working with local and nation level governments to actually collaborate and see if we can actually improve the regulation as well, which I've seen to most of the US companies might not sort of seem as a standard thing of a do. So that's a mentality we always had from day one. But separately, of course, it comes down to what actually we see is the development. If we see the regulation is already trending in the right direction, there's no need for us to engage. If we see that actually the regulation that's being proposed is actually going to restrict economic activity and then not have the most benefit for the consumers and suppliers, then we see, of course, that there's a business interest, obviously, as well, that we want to engage and make sure that the regulation trends in the right direction. So lately, it's been more of the latter, where we see that, for example, on the transportation side, regulation has been artificially overly restricted. So, for example, on the ride-hailing front and then taxi regulation front, just artificially, there's some old school legacy laws there that are restricting the industry, causing some of the highest consumer prices and very poor service. And that just needs to be updated and brought to the modern 21st century. So there's a clear reason for us to engage and see whether we can update and then innovate on the transportation side as well.
But certainly this is the biggest conversation in Brussels, in DC, is all about tech and digital, especially vis-a-vis, what's happening in China. In the DC space, we are talking a lot about transatlantic cooperation on digital innovation and digital issues. So would it not make sense for this to be the time that you engage, even if it's going positively, to kind of add to the trend that this is the right move for companies like yours?
Absolutely, and that's actually something where we were taking in a bigger initiative on the last couple of years as well. So specifically on the food delivery side, we're actually now collaborating with other European players to actually propose proactively what we see could be the guidelines and where the industry could be moving, rather than just passively wait for regulators to come up with their proposals. Because again, we see that there are changes needed, and it's our duty as companies leading in the space to actually propose and then move this regulation forward. So that's definitely something we're trying to promote to all the other European technology companies as well.
Wonderful. Thank you, Markus. Now, I'm just fascinated by Bolt because it is well, first of all, it's just the fact that you started it at 19. So I'll start with that, because at 19, I was certainly not there. But you started this company at 19. It started in Tallinn. Now you have a pretty vast operation in Africa. I just, how do you account for that trajectory where you're just, expanding so exponentially and globally? And it's a clear case to me of how Europeans can innovate and can have global impact. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. I see the ambition level of entrepreneurs in Europe has just exploded massively over the last 10 years. I remember when I was starting, people were still thinking that, hey, like if you grow the company to a size of a few hundred million in valuation as a proxy for size, I mean, that's already an awesome outcome. Now I see the ambition levels have grown tenfold and more. So nowadays, when I look at entrepreneurs in Estonia, they already dream of immediately going to dozens of countries and impacting millions of people. So that's been great to see. And then specifically, I hope that Bolt has also managed to show as an example that you don't necessarily need to move out from Central Eastern Europe. In fact, our legal and our physical headquarters is still in Estonia. We're relocating hundreds of people, extremely great talent from around the region into Tallinn, and able to show that you don't need to go to the UK, you don't need to go to Germany or US, but you can really build a global company that operates in 45 countries from tiny Estonia as well, and really set the precedent that more companies can follow that path.
You know, Markus, you say tiny Estonia, but even based on this conversation, I just find it sort of to be this giant presence in something that is going to be critical for years to come, which is, you know, it's exciting, especially because SIPA has engaged for so many years across the Baltic states as one of our core areas of work. But another area that we focus on and that you kind of, you know, just started unraveling there is our focus on the next generation of leaders. And we work really hard to try to develop, to provide platforms, to really give a voice to those that are up and coming, particularly in the policy space, but more so and increasingly on those that are working in the nexus of tech and policy, right? To ensure that as we're looking ahead, we have people that are educated about what happens in the sector, aid in making policy about the sector. And so would be curious to hear from you, what could institutions like ours, like SIPA and others that are working diligently to develop the next generation of leaders, what could we be doing better? And how can we continue to engage and really help professionals, young professionals develop?
There's, of course, a lot of components out there to unpack. One of those I see is fundamentally, actually, I see the trend is already very much in the right direction. Just looking at my own personal example from Estonia, over the last 2 decades, thanks to the success of Skype and the technology sector here, there's so many hundreds and hundreds of now experienced people coming out of these companies who are starting the next generation of companies. And then the sort of goes from there, and they bring and train up the next generation. And sort of this flywheel is already so strongly in motion across CE that's just within the technology space, great to see. And I think one of the big things we need to be mindful of is that we don't somehow restrict it. So my biggest worry is that the public space and the government would somehow like start to stop this great flywheel that's already in motion. So that's the first thing. Other than that, of course, there's many positive things that could be done. I see there's a lot of great youth programs going on that are supporting entrepreneurship in Estonia and across the region that are just in schools, for example, already helping young kids set up their companies and experiment with that. So really, there's dozens of small initiatives like that could be done, and many of my friends who are now entrepreneurs have gone through programs like that.
That's fantastic, Markus. Now, you know, you said that you're worried that something is going to happen to stop this great trend that is, you know, obviously on its way. So, you know, what do you think? I think you hinted at it, but what do you think are the biggest hurdles to tech innovation in Europe?
One that we're already dealing with at the moment is just access to great talent, which is that when we look at where most of our engineering and product and operational leadership is coming from, then many of those people are coming exactly from countries in the region like Russia, Ukraine, and so on. And to this day, it's been relatively easy for this top amazing talent of people to move into Estonia and set up here and then really grow their careers. And that's something that we hope will also continue. But just looking at some of the developments in the region, I mean, you can see that immigration is always a hot topic, and it's not clear that this can continue and we can keep on growing our talent in the region here. So that's the first one. Second, again, is regulation, which is, again, very business and industry specific. But for us, we see that in the world of transportation, it's just been too slow. When we look at some of the Western European countries like Germany and France and so on, they're actually lagging behind Central Eastern Europe. So we see the innovation here, and the markets are far more open. And actually, for companies like Bolt, it's so much easier to launch new products here, where regulation is far less of a blocker than it is in the sort of older, more traditional European countries.
And Markus, you just pointed at something that I think is, and I said it while we were chatting, offline, is that not everybody knows or is as aware that there's so much happening in Central and Eastern Europe when it comes to tech innovation. And that we really do need to bridge that divide of like Western Europe having these conversations, Central and Eastern Europe having these conversations, US having these conversations, partners and allies, just disparate. But, I wonder, as you look ahead, what would be the one message that you would give to folks in Brussels when it comes to the sector? What would be your biggest advice?
Biggest advice overall I see is that we really need to double down our investments into technology, specifically on the internet side, which comes in many layers. Of course, there's everything from education, but also financing of companies, where we see that still access to capital for many European companies continues to be far harder than it is for their US counterparts. So that's, again, even if after many years of talking about it and many moves on it, it's still something where we lag behind. And it needs to be a top priority because it's very clear where the world is moving. Traditional industries are fading in importance, and tech and specifically internet is growing. So unless we bet on that and we do it aggressively, we're going to be left behind.
Fantastic. One of the things that I would love to ask, I have two, but I'll start with this one is, what would you say to anyone that wants to follow your footsteps? Any advice for them?
First is that don't expect this to be an easy journey. I think it already makes sense to go in with the right expectations that if you want to build something meaningful in the world, it's going to take many years. And the best advice I always give is that really pick a field that you actually truly care about deeply, because as an entrepreneur, you will run into many challenges. And it's in times like those where you need to come back to your core principles and think through why are you doing this? And specifically in our case, we went against some of the largest technology companies in the world who had raised billions of dollars of funding. We were coming from tiny Estonia with essentially no financing at all. And the thing that kept us going was that we really cared. We were that, hey, this is the mission we're on. We want to build better cities. We see that Bolt can make an impact to how millions of people live. And that kept us going.
Now, Markus, the final thing, complete this sentence. The future of tech industry in Europe is?
In Central Eastern Europe.
Thank you, Markus, so much for taking the time and for chatting with us again on day 3 of SIPA Forum. Thank you, Markus. It's great to see you. And thank you all.
It was a pleasure. Thank you.